So if you paid attention to the Oscars at all this year, one thing that was really clear is that there's still a big appreciation out there for original filmmaking. The breakout winners like Anora and The Brutalist were indie movies much more than they were massive Hollywood blockbusters, which is great news for anyone interested in non-superhero filmmaking. But when you dig a little bit deeper, you start to find out that the reality is quite a bit darker, because even though this year's winners were dominated by scrappy indie productions, it turns out that the filmmakers behind them are not doing all that well financially. Success in entertainment is supposed to kind of go hand in hand with making money, so how is it possible that directors can succeed at the very highest levels and still be broke? And if those people are hurting, then what hope does that leave for the rest of us trying to make a living with cameras? So in this video, we're going to dive into why America's best filmmakers are broke, what that means for you and the future of the industry, and how a surprising lesson from Leonardo da Vinci might give you some peace of mind. Okay, so right off the bat, what am I even talking about? If you don't follow industry news, why am I claiming that some of the best filmmakers in the world are broke, and what does that have to do with you? Well, first off, I'm not claiming anything. I'm just repeating what several high-profile filmmakers have been saying recently in public, most notably Brady Corbett, who made The Brutalist, and Sean Baker, who made Anora. Between them, they took home 8 Oscars, which is pretty insane for films whose combined budgets are less than a single season of some of the TV shows I've worked on.
The Brutalist, Daniel.
Anora. Sean.
The Brutalist.
Anora.
And both of those people used their platform, or at least a chunk of the attention they were getting anyways, to say the same thing. Filmmakers today are struggling to survive. On the Mark Maron podcast, Corbett actually said he made literally $0 from The Brutalist despite all the critical attention, and it was such a surprising thing that Maron actually stopped and asked him to clarify.
Both my partner and I made $0 on the last 2 films that we made. So.
Zero.
Yes, actually 0. So we had to just sort of like live off of a paycheck from 3 years ago. And obviously the timing during an awards campaign and having to travel every 2 or 3 days was less than ideal.
He also made it very clear that he wasn't alone in that experience when he said,
I've spoken to many filmmakers that have films that are nominated this year that can't pay their rent. I mean, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
You're not paid to be promoting a film.
It's not that hard to figure out. He's probably referring, or at least partly referring, to Sean Baker here, as the two are friends, and Baker has also been very vocal on his indie money issues. In one interview, Sean said, "Indie film is struggling right now more than ever. I personally do not have children, but I know for a fact that if I did, I would not be able to make the movies that I make." And basically, he's saying here that for what he's earning on his films, he would find it hard to support a family. At least that's how I read that. So what's going on here? Because aren't you supposed to be able to get rich when you do well in show business?
You sure about that?
Well, there's a couple reasons that we'll get more into, but the short version is that to make a film from start to finish like these guys did takes a long time, like years. And while there might be a decent director's fee or something attached to the project initially, there's so much unpaid labor that goes into promoting and finishing a film that most people don't even realize, and as it stretches on for years, that paycheck just doesn't last. Corbett directly said he was so busy doing promotion for free that he couldn't take any other jobs and basically didn't earn anything for 3 years. On top of that, the economic model of the past is pretty much dead. It used to be that a film's profits were based on an initial infusion of cash from the theatrical release, but then also there'd be a second round of profit that would come later through DVD sales and rentals and stuff like that. But as we know now, streaming services have completely torpedoed that model, and filmmakers haven't quite figured out how to make that money back. Like it used to be, you took a big risk with the initial investment, but then if it went well, you'd get a cut of the profits later on, or at least that was the theory. But since no one buys or rents anything anymore, that's gone, and really the streamers are kind of the only people who are making much after the theatrical release is over. And then add to that fewer and fewer people are actually going to the movie theaters these days, it kind of makes the box office return even less, and then it starts to doom spiral. Because movies aren't really getting cheaper to make, it's just that there's no clear path to making that money back anymore unless you have a franchise that sells toys or something. And if you can't make your money back, then there won't be a next project. Now, if that sounds brutal, it's because it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But at the same time that all of this is true, I'm also having a very different experience as a film professional. Now, I'm just some random documentary DP in Canada, and I haven't won even a single Oscar and probably will not, but the post-COVID years have been some of my most profitable ever, and I don't really feel like I'm struggling that much. I mean, I'm not over here making millions, and I drive a 15-year-old car, so my standards aren't exactly high, but for my pretty modest middle-class needs, even in stupidly expensive Toronto, I'm doing fine. So how can both situations be true? In what world am I more financially secure than Sean Baker, one of the best working filmmakers alive? Doesn't that seem a bit crazy? Well, the simple truth is that only one of us is actually a filmmaker in the literal sense of the word. And here's what I mean by that. So I'm a freelance cinematographer who specializes in documentaries. If you want to tell a real story and you need someone who functions at a high level pretty much anywhere in the world, is good at forming relationships with strangers, and has a good eye, at least in my very biased opinion, you offer me a day rate. And if I like the project and we think we'll get along, I'll come and shoot it for you. Pretty simple. Sometimes I'll direct, sometimes I'll do a little commercial here and there, but the basic situation is the same. I don't write the scripts, I don't do the editing, I don't pitch the projects, and I stay away from producing as much as I possibly can. I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a film worker. Very occasionally I'll find a story I really like and I'll decide to make something myself as an actual filmmaker, but that's pretty rare and I almost always expect it to lose money. Now, Sean Baker and Brady Corbett are filmmakers. Yes, they're directors, but they're also doing so many other things. They're literally bringing the film from nothing through to the Oscars, plus months and months of promotion, and making the whole thing happen mainly because of their will and perseverance. Can you see the difference? Now, you can bet that most of the crew working on Anora or The Brutalist made money too, and it's ultimately just the filmmakers who come out so far behind for most of the reasons we talked about. It's insane to say, but once all the hours are counted, it's the people who do the most to champion a film who usually make the least. Now, I'm not saying that these guys are on Skid Row or anything, and if they wanted to make money, they could. Like if Sean Baker decided he really wanted to make money this year, I'm pretty sure he could sign on to direct a new Apple TV series and get a fat paycheck like tomorrow. Likewise, if Brady Corbett jumped back into directing commercials after this, I bet he'll get offers from all over the place from the biggest brands in the world. But then they won't be there as filmmakers, they'll be executing on someone else's vision, and that's an important difference. And that's really the central point of this video. Becoming a professional full-time filmmaker just isn't a real thing for 99% of people in 2025, especially if you want to live a middle-class standard of life. There's still lots of money in film and video and media in general, but to get it, almost everyone, including Oscar winners, is going to need some sort of day job. And that's where Davinci comes into this whole thing, because when I say things like how it's almost impossible to live as a true filmmaker, it's easy to get discouraged and feel like it used to be possible, that it just isn't anymore. But the truth is that it's almost never been possible to live as a self-directed artist. I mean, Davinci, one of the most famous artists and inventors of all time, had day jobs pretty much his entire life. They happen to be adjacent to his creative passions, which is great, but he wasn't able to spend his time just following his own interests. He didn't paint the Mona Lisa because he was inspired. It was a commission from a rich silk merchant. He spent years building siege equipment for a murderous Italian dictator because it was the only way he could fund his studio.
Leonardo da Vinci.
If Da Vinci was living today, it would be like if Apple or Meta hired him to paint murals in their lobby or something. In his free time, he can doodle the Vitruvian Man or invent the bicycle, but he spent a lot of his time working a day job because someone rich paid him to do it. Filmmaking and the arts in general are the same today as they were back then, because there really never have been all that many actual filmmakers in the purest Sean Baker-iest sense of the word. And there really haven't been all that many pure artists of that type at any point in history either, who could just pursue their craft without some sort of day job. Sure, a few mega rich dukes or people descended from royalty like Lord Byron or something are an exception, but that's because they didn't have to worry about bills. If you work in this industry at all, it won't take long before you hear someone say some version of the expression one for the meal and one for the real, which basically just means you do one job that puts food on the table so that the next one can be a passion project. And realistically, that's a pretty ambitious ratio for most people, because at least in my career, it's been more like 10 for the meal and one for the real. And I'm okay with that, but it's worth paying attention to for anyone out there looking to become a filmmaker. Personally, I love that Sean and Brady are doing them all for the real, because as an audience member and a fan of their work, I get to watch incredible movies. Anora was my favorite movie of the year, and I actually interviewed the DP Drew Daniels on this channel a little while ago, so check that out if you want. I have so much respect for those people and the work they produce, but for me personally, I can't do it. I need those day jobs to keep me going until I eventually find a project I'm so passionate about I can't stand the idea of not doing it. And make no mistake, if you want to be a filmmaker on the level of those people, you'll need that kind of passion to even stand a chance at pulling it off. Like when I look at my one attempt at directing a feature, like not just shooting it, but directing it, I can say it's so much harder than I was prepared. And if I wasn't fully obsessed with the story, I'd never have been able to get through it. When you hear Brady or Sean talk about their films and what it took to make them, it's clear they had superhuman levels of dedication and scrappiness. There's a directors on directors interview out there on YouTube somewhere where they start talking about having meeting after meeting after meeting about the precise runtime of their movies, even though no one had even seen them yet.
I knew going into this film, into Anora, that it was going to be 220. I had to sign a contract saying I would deliver the film at 210. That killed me because I knew I was lying when I signed that contract. Sure. I knew it. And yet I thought, okay, but I don't even understand. Am I going to be held to this? It's not cool. Yeah. And because I lived with that stress for over a year. A year.
And that's the kind of thing that'll drive an artist insane. So to keep doing that again, and again, it takes a special kind of person and a different kind of dedication. And to do that over and over without stopping to pad the bank account with those meal jobs in between, it needs a superhuman level of devotion to the craft. Assuming you don't have that kind of devotion, which unless you're an extreme outlier, you probably don't, the takeaway here is that you will most likely need a day job in film. That could take many forms, both inside and outside of the film industry. You could make amazing films while holding down a job as a chemical engineer, and you'd probably be a lot less stressed about money. If you want to stay inside the industry, that most likely means working as crew. That could be as a director, like on a big Netflix show, or it could be as a dolly grip on a Hallmark movie of the week. You could shoot cinematic weddings or edit social media reels. There's a massive range when it comes to this stuff, but the important difference is that these jobs are not your personal brainchild, like Anora was for Sean. In my case, I pay my bills shooting other people's documentaries and TV shows as cinematographer. I might have an important role in the project, and I very well could be heavily involved in the planning and shaping of the story, but it's clear that I'm not the filmmaker, and most of the time neither is the director. Hopefully you can see the distinction there. It's small, but also huge. The good news is that I love my day job. Actually, most of the time I prefer working as a DP than a filmmaker, because to be honest, I've only ever been a filmmaker maybe 5 or 6 times in my whole career, but that's more than enough to understand what it requires to make a film. Being a filmmaker means sweating all the small stuff all the time, and if you don't love your story, you'll never see it through. In my day job as a DP, I enjoy a lot of the best aspects from the filmmaking process. So like being out in the world in an interesting and dynamic work environment in a way that's creatively satisfying. But after a few weeks or a few months of work, I go home while the filmmaker is really just getting started. Plus, I get paid, sometimes pretty well, regardless of what happens with the project, and I don't hate that either. Of course, sometimes not having creative control is incredibly frustrating, and you'll wish you were the one calling the shots, and in those times, the thought of being the filmmaker can seem pretty appealing. But don't be fooled. If you want to do it like some of those Oscar winners, it will do its best to crush you. Okay, so then why even bother? Am I just saying that filmmaking is the worst and everyone should just get day jobs on mediocre stuff and collect a paycheck? No, definitely not. And I'd argue that if you're just doing that, you're going to be in the trouble long term in this modern industry where middle-class crew jobs seem to be drying up. To stand out, it's super important that you make work that showcases the best you can do and the unique vision you bring to the table. And since you're often a bit constrained on your paying gigs, like you're shooting to someone else's plan, if you want to do your own thing and you want to do it your own way, you got to do it yourself, i.e. become the filmmaker. Then if all goes well, you now have a calling card piece that people will see, and if it's good, they'll want you to bring those talents to their projects, which then boost the quality of your day job gigs that come in, and so on. Every time you go through this cycle, you'll move a little bit higher up. Like right now or in the very near future, I bet Grady Corbett has a ton of offers in his inbox for everything from fashion commercials to Amazon Prime series. He gave a lot to make The Brutalist, and if he chooses to now, he can capitalize it. Whether or not he does it is totally up to him, and if you were in his position, there really is no easy answer. Personally, I'd probably take a year to regroup and make a serious chunk of cash while my name was hot, then come back for another stab at a project with a healthy bit of savings behind me. Now, you out there watching it might feel totally different and think that if the roles were reversed, you'd go the complete opposite direction and do pure art only. There is no wrong decision there, and Brady and Sean should have quite a few options after this. Selfishly, I hope they just go straight into the next indie masterpiece, but I'm not sure I'd be able to do the same same myself. The point here isn't to say what the right move is, and who knows, maybe for their next films they'll get both artistic control and a nice check. But the point is that the dichotomy between commerce and creativity is going to be a balance that everyone in this business will have to find on their own. If you've got 3 kids going to college, you're going to have a different outlook than someone with no family who can just take off to Romania for 6 months of shooting. I don't know, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. So what's the ultimate takeaway here? What can we learn from the public financial struggles facing some of the year's most awarded filmmakers? Well, firstly, it's that for 99% of the people working in the film and media business, you can't make a good living just doing whatever you want. But that's never really been an option for creative people at any point in history outside a handful of famous elites. Almost everyone needs a commercial arm to their business, whatever that might be, which means a day job. It might be on big sets or in a rental house somewhere, or it might be in a completely different field, but you'll have to be able to pay the bills somehow, and that can be pretty brutal for auteur type filmmakers. Now, if you really, really don't want to do that and you're singularly focused on making your own work, that's extremely commendable, and the world needs more people like you. But if that's the plan, you have to acknowledge what Sean and Brady are saying about the struggle and accept that as a fact of your life. We can push for that to change, we can vote with our wallets by going back to the theater, and we can support independent film all day, which I hope we do.
Movie theaters, especially independently owned theaters, are struggling, and it's up to us to support them.
But in the current landscape as it is now, you're really not making it very easy on yourself if you go the art route alone. Do I wish it were different? For sure. But it's the way it is right now, so you and I have to make it work anyways. The sooner we do that and figure out what your particular brand of day job looks like, the safer you'll be. I guess I really just wanted to make this video to get the point out there, because in the age of YouTube University, there's a lot of people who are chasing the dream of being a filmmaker without really knowing what that means. It's still totally worth going after, but you should at least understand what the reality is. At the same time, we need high quality independent films more than ever, because they tell stories that are often hard to get funded through the traditional studio system. The studios don't want to risk it on things that they don't think they can make money on, and that's how you end up with nothing but Marvel movies in the theaters. But this whole situation has been a very good lesson on filmmaking economics in 2025. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these guys are living on the street or anything, but they really didn't come out ahead from these projects, financially anyways. Now I'm sure they can have their pick of any number of lucrative day jobs if they want, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they do next. So what would you do in their position? And how do you personally find that balance between art and commerce? Let me know. See ya.